Everyone in the city knew that crossing Lorenzo Simon was a death sentence. But disrespecting his fiancée, Francesca Rossi, was considered something far more terrifying. She didn't just end careers. She collected fear like other women collected jewelry, wielding humiliation as her weapon of choice against anyone she deemed beneath her station. But on a humid Friday night at Casa d'Oro, the most exclusive Italian restaurant in the city, the ice queen of the underworld made a lethal miscalculation. She thought she was tormenting just another frightened waitress in a tight uniform. She didn't realize she was provoking the one woman in the room who could recognize the scent of cyanide on a perfectly seared steak, and who knew exactly how to stop an assassination with nothing more than a dinner fork. This is the story of how 10 guns were drawn in unison, not because someone reached for a weapon, but because a bodyguard recognized a killing strike when he saw one. The atmosphere inside Casa d'Oro was not so much elegant as it was suffocating. It was the kind of silence that reeked of old money and fresh blood, where conversations were conducted in whispers and everyone understood that the wrong word could end a life. The walls were adorned with Renaissance replicas, the chandeliers dripped Murano glass, and the air carried the aroma of truffle risotto mixed with underlying dread. Valentina Bruno adjusted the black bow tie at her collar, her eyes making their routine sweep of the dining floor. She had been working at Casa d'Oro for 3 months. To the management, she was their most reliable server, punctual, professional, and mysteriously fluent in 5 languages. To the patrons, she was invisible, just another pair of hands delivering plates and refilling wine glasses. That was exactly how Valentina needed it. "Table 7, hissed Marcus, the floor manager, a thin man who perpetually looked like he was one mistake away from a heart attack. "It's the Simon reservation." Valentina felt the shift in energy ripple through the entire wait staff. The Simon reservation meant Lorenzo Simon, the man who controlled every criminal enterprise from the harbor to the hills, and Francesca Rossi, the woman he would marry in what everyone understood was less a wedding and more a coronation of terror. "I'll take it," Valentina said quietly. Marcus's eyes went wide with something between concern and relief. "Are you certain?" Francesca sent the last girl home in tears. Made her stand there while she criticized her posture for 15 minutes before demanding she be fired for visual pollution. "I'm certain," Valentina replied, her face an unreadable canvas. "I've handled difficult tables before." She moved toward table 7, the corner booth that was simultaneously the most private and most visible position in the restaurant, the location where power wanted to be seen but not heard. The entourage arrived like a storm front, 6 men in tailored suits that couldn't quite conceal the weapons beneath, moving in practiced formation. Lorenzo Simon took his seat first. He was all controlled violence and calculated stillness, a man who wore a 3-piece suit like armor and surveyed the room the way generals surveyed battlefields. He didn't reach for the menu. His attention stayed on the entrance, on the angles, on potential threats. Then Francesca Rossi glided in beside him. She was breathtaking in the way that venomous things often are. Porcelain skin, raven hair swept into an immaculate chignon, and lips painted the precise shade of arterial blood. She wore a crimson dress that probably cost more than Valentina's entire year of rent, and she moved through space as if the world existed solely to frame her beauty. Her designer clutch hit the white tablecloth with deliberate force, causing the silverware to shiver. "This temperature is unbearable," Francesca announced, her voice pitched to carry just far enough to make neighboring tables uncomfortable. "Marcus, am I expected to dine in what feels like a meat locker?" Valentina stepped forward before Marcus could spiral into apologies. "Good evening, Mr. Simon, Miss Rossi." Welcome to Casadoro. The temperature is set to our standard climate for optimal food preservation, but I would be happy to request an adjustment to your personal comfort." Francesca's head snapped up, dark eyes narrowing as she conducted a slow, predatory assessment. She was searching for weakness, a nervous twitch, a coffee stain, a tremor in the hands. Finding none, her mouth curved into something that might have been a smile on someone with a soul. "I don't want adjustments," Francesca said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "I want competence. Bring me still water, San Pellegrino, in a glass with exactly 3 ice cubes. And if I taste even a hint of tap water, I'll make sure you never work in this city again." Lorenzo didn't speak. He simply watched Valentina with dark, calculating eyes. Most servers wilted under that combined scrutiny. Valentina simply inclined her head, a ghost of professional courtesy on her lips. "Of course, Miss Rossi. Right away." As Valentina turned toward the bar, she heard Francesca's crystalline laugh pierce the careful quiet. "Where do they find these people, Lorenzo? She has the dead eyes of a department store mannequin." Valentina's expression didn't change, but her mind was already working several moves ahead. She knew who Francesca Rossi claimed to be, the daughter of the Rossi wine empire, educated in Switzerland, a woman of impeccable breeding who had somehow captured the city's most dangerous man. But Valentina also knew what others didn't. She had a gift for details, for the small inconsistencies that money couldn't quite erase. The faint scar on Francesca's right hand that matched a specific combat training injury, the way she held her fork with her left hand, despite claiming to be right-dominant in every society photo, the micro-expression that flickered across her face whenever Lorenzo mentioned his business rivals. Not concern, but calculation. Tonight wasn't just about serving dinner. Tonight was about watching, waiting, and survival. Because Valentina Bruno knew something that no one else in that room knew. She had seen Francesca Rossi's face before, 3 years ago, in a classified briefing about a covert assassination network known only as the Black Widows. And if Francesca recognized her in return, neither of them would leave Casadoro alive. Before we begin, kindly subscribe and tell me where you are watching from. I'll be in the comments responding to everyone. The steak arrived on a hand-painted Limoges plate, the meat glistening under the chandelier light like a promise of violence. Francesca's manicured fingers reached for her knife, but then she paused, her crimson lips curling into something cruel. "You," she said, snapping her fingers at Valentina. "Come here." Valentina approached with measured steps, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "This steak looks overcooked," Francesca announced, though the ribeye was a perfect medium rare, blood pooling at its edges. "Actually, it smells rotten. Doesn't it smell rotten, Lorenzo?" Lorenzo said nothing, his dark eyes fixed on his fiancée, with an expression that could have been amusement or warning. "I think," Francesca continued, her voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby tables, "that our waitress here should taste it first. You know, to ensure quality control." She pushed the plate forward. "Eat a piece. Now." The bodyguards shifted uncomfortably. This was theater, humiliation as performance art. Valentina leaned forward slightly, and that's when she caught it. The faint, bitter scent beneath the char and rosemary. Almonds. Not the sweet kind from dessert, but the chemical approximation that meant only one thing. Cyanide. Her mind calculated in milliseconds. The poison was on Lorenzo's steak, not Francesca's identical plate, positioned 6 inches to the left. This wasn't bullying. This was an execution masked as dinner service. Francesca's hand moved toward the plates, ready to rotate them in the practiced motion of sharing food between couples. The gesture that would seal Lorenzo's fate. Valentina moved. Her right hand shot forward, the silver fork gripped in a reverse tactical hold. The tines came down with surgical precision, pinning Francesca's wrist to the white tablecloth with enough force to draw a single drop of blood, but not enough to puncture through. The specific angle, the speed, the follow-through. It was a combat technique called the Scorpion Strike, designed to immobilize without killing. It was also a maneuver known only to a very specific subset of trained killers. The response was instantaneous. 10 guns cleared leather in perfect synchronization, the metallic chorus of sliding steel filling the pressurized silence. Lorenzo's bodyguards had their weapons trained on Valentina before Francesca's scream even left her throat. But they weren't moving closer. They were frozen, recognition flickering across their professionally blank faces. Lorenzo raised one hand slightly, a gesture that said, "Wait." His eyes moved from the fork, pinning his fiancée's wrist to Valentina's face, reading the absence of fear, the controlled breathing, the stance of someone ready for the bullets that might come. "Explain," he said quietly. Not a question, a command. "The steak is poisoned," Valentina said, her voice steady despite the 10 barrels pointed at her skull. "Cyanide compound, likely potassium or sodium variant. You can smell the almonds beneath the seasoning if you know what to look for." "You lying bitch!" Francesca shrieked, trying to pull her wrist free and failing. "She's insane! Lorenzo, she attacked me!" "Then eat it," Valentina said calmly, her eyes never leaving Lorenzo's. "If I'm wrong, I'll resign and you can have me arrested. But if I'm right, your fiancé just tried to murder you." Francesca's face went pale beneath her makeup. "I'm not eating anything this psychopath touched." "You weren't going to eat it anyway," Valentina continued, nodding toward Francesca's plate. "That one's clean. You were going to rotate the plates. It's what couples do, sharing food. Except you would have made sure he got the poisoned portion." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He reached for the plate, and 4 bodyguards simultaneously said, "Boss, don't." Instead, Lorenzo gestured toward the small white dog in a designer carrier at Francesca's feet, a Maltese that went everywhere with her, a living accessory. "Your dog," Lorenzo said softly. "Feed it to Snowball." "What?" "No." "I'm not." "Now." The word carried the weight of absolute authority. One of the bodyguards retrieved the dog, holding it while another cut a small piece of the steak. The Maltese, bred for decorative purposes and fed organic treats, eagerly consumed the meat. For 15 seconds, nothing happened. Then the dog began to seize, its small body convulsing as foam gathered at its mouth. It was dead before it hit the floor. Francesca lunged, but Valentina's fork held firm. Lorenzo stood slowly, his face carved from ice. "Take her to the wine cellar," he said. Then his eyes found Valentina's. "You, stay." The guns finally lowered. Francesca's screams echoed through Casa d'Oro as 2 bodyguards hauled her toward the kitchen, her designer heels scraping against the marble floor. "You're dead! Do you hear me? You're fucking dead, Lorenzo! She's lying! This is a setup! I'll destroy you, you little—" The heavy door to the wine cellar slammed shut, muffling her threats into distant, impotent noise. The restaurant had erupted into chaos the moment the dog hit the floor. Patrons fled without paying, leaving half-eaten meals and designer coats draped over chairs. Marcus was somewhere in the back, probably hyperventilating into a paper bag. Within 3 minutes, Casa d'Oro was empty, except for Lorenzo's men, who positioned themselves at every exit with the efficiency of a military operation. Lorenzo hadn't moved from his seat. He simply gestured to the chair across from him, the one Francesca had occupied minutes before. Sit. Valentina's hand still gripped the fork, now stained with a single drop of blood. She released it carefully, letting it clatter onto the plate, and lowered herself into the chair. Her heart was pounding, but years of training kept her breathing steady, her expression neutral. Lorenzo poured 2 glasses of wine from the bottle that had already been opened and tested. He slid one toward her. Drink, you've earned it. She didn't touch the glass. Smart, Lorenzo said, a ghost of amusement flickering across his face. He took a sip from his own glass, then switched them, drinking from hers. Now it's safe. Drink. Valentina took the glass but didn't raise it to her lips. I should leave. I've already caused enough disruption. Disruption. Lorenzo leaned back, his dark eyes studying her the way a jeweler examines a diamond for flaws. You just saved my life and exposed a Black Widow operative who spent 6 months infiltrating my organization. I'd call that something other than disruption. He tilted his head slightly. The question is, how does a waitress recognize a scorpion strike quickly enough to execute one? I don't know what that is, Valentina said, keeping her voice level. I just reacted. You reacted, Lorenzo repeated slowly, as if tasting the lie. With a combat technique taught exclusively to covert assassination units in 3 countries, Russia, Israel, and one very specific cartel training facility in Medellin. He folded his hands on the table. Waitresses don't hold forks with a reverse tactical grip. So I'll ask you once, and I suggest you answer honestly. Who are you? Valentina met his gaze, calculating her options. Running was impossible with armed men at every exit. Fighting would get her killed. Lying might buy her time. But this man hadn't built an empire by being fooled by pretty faces and convenient stories. My name is Valentina Bruno, she said carefully. I've been working here for 3 months. Everything on my employment application is accurate. Except the part where you're a trained killer. Lorenzo reached across the table before she could pull back, his fingers closing around her right wrist. He turned her hand, palm up, exposing the calluses along the edge of her palm and the base of her fingers. These aren't from carrying plates. These are from weapons training, specifically handguns and combat knives. His thumb traced a thin scar along her inner forearm. And this is from a knife defense drill that went wrong. Am I getting warmer? Valentina tried to pull her hand back, but his grip was iron. Then there's this, Lorenzo continued, pushing up her sleeve to reveal the edge of a tattoo, partially covered by makeup. 3 interlocking circles with a crown at the center. His expression hardened. That's the mark of the Tres Coronas cartel, the ones who train child soldiers to be weapons. He released her wrist. So let me rephrase my question. What is the daughter of Miguel Bruno doing serving tables in my city, and how long have you been planning to kill me? The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Valentina's mind raced through scenarios, denials, partial truths, complete confessions. But Lorenzo's eyes told her that he already knew enough to have her killed on principle. The only card she had left was the truth, or at least enough of it to keep breathing. I'm not here to kill you, she said quietly. I'm here to hide from the people who want to kill me. Lorenzo poured himself another glass of wine. Then I suggest you start talking, Miss Bruno, and make it convincing. If you're listening right now, help me prove someone wrong. My wife said I wouldn't even reach 2,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe now. Thank you. One of Lorenzo's men approached the table with the silent efficiency of a shadow, leaning down to whisper in his boss's ear. Lorenzo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign that the information displeased him. He dismissed the guard with a subtle nod and turned his attention back to Valentina. "It seems," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying the kind of cold fury that preceded bloodshed, "that my evening is full of revelations." He stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Come with me." It wasn't a request. Valentina followed him through the kitchen, past terrified line cooks who pretended to be invisible, and down a narrow staircase that led to the wine cellar. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, and the air smelled of oak barrels and old stone. Francesca was zip-tied to a chair in the center of the room, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears and rage. 2 guards flanked her, weapons holstered, but ready. Lorenzo ignored his former fiancée entirely. Instead, he moved to a laptop open on a makeshift desk, a wine barrel covered with a black cloth. The screen displayed a series of photographs and documents. 20 minutes ago, Lorenzo began, his eyes scanning the information. "I received confirmation that the real Francesca Rossi died in a car accident in Monaco 7 months ago. Single vehicle collision on a mountain road. The body was burned beyond recognition, identified only by dental records." He turned the laptop so Valentina could see. Dental records that were submitted by a private clinic that, coincidentally, no longer exists. The photograph showed a beautiful woman with dark hair and the same general features as the woman tied to the chair, but the eyes were different. Softer, less predatory. "The woman I've been sleeping next to for 6 months," Lorenzo continued, his voice devoid of emotion, "is an operative from an organization we've only heard whispers about. They call themselves the Black Widows. Ghost stories in our world. Assassins so deep undercover that they become their targets' lovers. Confidantes, wives." He finally looked at the woman in the chair. "Tell me, how long were you planning to wait before putting a bullet in my head? Or were you going to wait until after the wedding? Make it look like a grieving widow's suicide pact?" Francesca, or whoever she really was, smiled through blooded lips. "You were already dead, Lorenzo. You just didn't know it yet." "Who hired you?" Lorenzo demanded. "Does it matter? You have enemies in every direction. Take your pick." Lorenzo pulled his weapon with practiced ease, pressing the barrel against her forehead. For 3 seconds, nobody breathed. Then he lowered the gun and holstered it. "Take her to the facility. I want names, contacts, and every piece of information extracted by morning. Use whatever methods are necessary." The guards hauled her toward a service exit. Her laughter echoed off the stone walls until the door slammed shut. Lorenzo turned to face Valentina, his expression unreadable. "Twice tonight I've been reminded of my mortality. First, I was nearly poisoned at dinner. Second, I discovered the woman I was going to marry was sent to kill me." He moved closer, invading her space in a way that was both threatening and intimate. "Which brings me to you, Valentina Bruno, daughter of a cartel king, trained killer, currently working as a waitress and living in a studio apartment in the warehouse district under a lease signed with forged documents." Valentina's blood ran cold. "You had me investigated. The moment you pinned that fork through her wrist, I had my people pull everything on you. It took them 17 minutes. He circled her slowly, a predator assessing prey. "Your father is dead. Killed by his own lieutenants 3 years ago. You disappeared the same night, after allegedly refusing to execute a family that owed money. Very noble, also very stupid, considering those same lieutenants have had a bounty on your head ever since." "I don't want trouble," Valentina said quietly. "I just want to be left alone." "You stopped being alone the moment you saved my life. Lorenzo stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with gunpowder residue. "I have a problem, Valentina. Someone wants me dead badly enough to plant a trained operative in my bed for 6 months. That level of patience, that kind of resource investment, means there are more coming, and clearly I can't trust my own instincts anymore." He extended his hand, palm up, a gesture that was somehow more dangerous than pointing a gun. "So here's my offer. You work for me. You become my eyes, my early warning system. You identify threats before they get close enough to poison my food or share my pillow. In exchange, I protect you from your past. New identity, new life, and enough resources that the Tres Coronas cartel becomes a problem I solve for you, not something you run from." Valentina stared at his outstretched hand. "And if I refuse?" Lorenzo's smile was cold. "Then you walk out that door, and I give you a 10-minute head start before I sell your location to the highest bidder. Self-preservation, you understand." She looked at his hand, then at his eyes, searching for deception and finding only brutal honesty. Valentina reached out and shook his hand. "I want it in writing." "Already being drafted," Lorenzo replied. "Welcome to the family, Miss Bruno." The drive to Lorenzo's estate took 40 minutes through increasingly isolated roads, the city lights fading into darkness, punctuated only by the occasional street lamp. Valentina sat in the back of the armored SUV, separated from Lorenzo by 12 inches of leather seat that felt like a chasm. 3 additional vehicles formed a convoy around them, headlights cutting through the night like searchlights hunting for threats. The estate revealed itself gradually. First the perimeter wall, 15 feet of stone and iron that looked medieval, but hummed with modern sensors. Then the gate that required 3 separate authentication protocols. And finally the main house, a sprawling Mediterranean villa that managed to look both beautiful and fortified. "Home," Lorenzo said simply, as if the armed guards patrolling the grounds were landscaping features. Inside, the house was a study in controlled opulence. Marble floors, art that was probably worth more than small countries, and floor-to-ceiling windows that, Valentina noted immediately, were bulletproof and tinted against laser microphones. Every luxury had a defensive purpose. "Your room is upstairs, 3rd door on the left," Lorenzo said, shrugging out of his jacket. Underneath, she could see the shoulder holster he'd worn all evening. "You'll find clothes in your size, toiletries, everything you need. My head of security will brief you on the systems in the morning." Valentina followed him up the curved staircase, hyper-aware of his presence, the way he moved through his own space with absolute confidence. He stopped at a door, opening it to reveal a bedroom that was larger than her entire former apartment. The color scheme was cream and gold, feminine without being frivolous, and through the window she could see the moonlit grounds stretching toward the tree line. "There's a panic button by the bed," Lorenzo added. "Press it and you'll have 10 armed men at your door in 30 seconds. He paused at the threshold. "You're safe here, Valentina. Get some rest." He turned to leave, but she caught his wrist, her fingers closing around expensive watch and warm skin. "I need to check the perimeter." Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. "My security team does sweeps every 2 hours." "With respect to your team," Valentina said, releasing him. "Someone got close enough to your inner circle to sleep in your bed for 6 months. I'd like to verify the defenses myself." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or intrigue. "Give me 5 minutes to change. I'll take you myself." When he returned, Valentina had already stripped out of her waitress uniform and into clothes she'd found in the closet. Black tactical pants that fit perfectly, a dark grey shirt, and boots that were broken in just enough to be comfortable. She'd pulled her hair into a severe ponytail and scrubbed off the minimal makeup she'd worn for work. Lorenzo stopped in the doorway, and for the first time that evening, his carefully controlled expression slipped. He'd changed into dark jeans and a black Henley that did nothing to hide the lean muscle underneath, but his focus was entirely on her. This wasn't the invisible waitress or the woman in the wine cellar negotiating for her life. This was the weapon her father had forged, all sharp edges and coiled violence. "Better," he said quietly, though it wasn't clear if he was talking about the clothes or something else entirely. They walked the grounds in silence at first, Valentina's eyes cataloguing every shadow, every angle, every potential breach point. She noted the camera blind spots, only 2, both intentional kill zones. The guard rotations were staggered, but predictable. The dogs were Dobermans, well-trained but food-motivated, a potential weakness. "You're finding flaws," Lorenzo observed, walking close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. "I'm finding opportunities," Valentina corrected. "Everything can be exploited if someone is patient enough." "And are you patient enough?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that had nothing to do with security. Valentina stopped walking, turning to face him. The moonlight cast his features in sharp relief, all angles and shadows. She could feel the pull of him, the magnetic field that dangerous men generated, the promise of protection and destruction in equal measure. "I can't stay here," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. I'm not built for safe houses and protection details. I survive by moving, by staying invisible." "You were invisible for 3 years," Lorenzo countered, stepping closer. "How did that work out? You're still looking over your shoulder, still one recognition away from a bullet." His hand came up, fingers ghosting along her jawline. "Or you could stop running and start fighting from a position of strength." Every instinct Valentina had screamed at her to pull away, to run, to disappear into the night the way she'd done 100 times before. But a different voice, quieter but insistent, whispered that she was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of being alone. Tired of being nothing but a ghost haunting the margins of her own life. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. Lorenzo's thumb traced her lower lip. "Then learn." The air between them crackled with electricity, and Valentina realized with sudden clarity that the most dangerous thing in this estate wasn't the armed guards, or the security systems, or even the enemies plotting beyond the walls. It was the man standing inches away, offering her everything she'd convinced herself she could never have. The attack came 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning that had started unremarkably with coffee and intelligence briefings. Lorenzo had a meeting with his accountants in the financial district, routine business that required his physical presence for signatures that couldn't be digitized. Valentina had argued against the trip, citing the exposed route and predictable timing, but Lorenzo had overruled her. "We can't let them turn us into prisoners," he'd said, straightening his tie in the mirror. "Fear is a currency I refuse to spend." Now, as the convoy moved through the industrial district, where warehouses gave way to shipping containers stacked like steel dominoes, Valentina was regretting that she hadn't argued harder. She sat in the back seat beside Lorenzo, her eyes constantly scanning the environment. The lead vehicle was 50 yards ahead, the follow car matching their distance behind. Standard protective formation, textbook execution, which was exactly what made her nervous. Predictability was death. The explosion came from beneath the lead vehicle, a shaped charge that lifted the SUV 3 feet into the air before it crashed down in a twisted wreck of metal and flame. Their driver slammed the brakes, training overriding instinct, which was exactly what the ambush had anticipated. Gunfire erupted from the shipping containers on both sides, a coordinated crossfire that shredded the follow vehicle's tires and sent it careening into a concrete barrier. Armor-piercing rounds sparked off their own SUV's reinforced body, spiderwebbing the bulletproof windows. "Get down!" the driver shouted, reaching for his weapon. Valentina was already moving. She lunged forward between the seats, grabbed the driver by his tactical vest, and physically hauled him into the back beside Lorenzo. "I'm driving!" "What the—" She didn't wait for permission. Sliding into the driver's seat, she slammed the vehicle into reverse, the engine roaring as she accelerated backward at 60 miles per hour. The shooters adjusted their aim, but they'd positioned themselves for a static target, not a vehicle moving in retreat at highway speeds. "Seat belts!" Valentina snapped, her eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the side mirrors, processing angles and obstacles with the calculating precision of a machine. A panel van screeched out from behind a container, trying to block their escape route. Valentina spun the wheel hard, executing a reverse J-turn that pivoted them 180 degrees. The tires screamed, physics and momentum fighting each other until she punched the accelerator and rocketed forward, clipping the van's front quarter panel and sending it spinning. "Left side!" Lorenzo called out, and she saw the motorcycle emerging from cover, the rider raising an automatic weapon. Valentina jerked the wheel right, then immediately left, the SUV's weight and momentum turning it into a 3-ton weapon. The motorcycle tried to compensate, but misjudged the timing. The SUV's armored bumper caught the bike's rear wheel, sending rider and machine tumbling across the asphalt in a spray of sparks and screaming metal. More gunfire peppered their vehicle, and Valentina heard the distinct sound of a round penetrating the armor, a lucky shot or a higher caliber weapon. Lorenzo grunted, a sound that made her blood freeze. "I'm fine," he said immediately, pressure in his voice. "Keep driving." She pushed the SUV to its limits, weaving through the industrial maze with the kind of aggressive precision that only came from training in places where mistakes meant death. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded as they put distance between themselves and the kill zone. Valentina didn't slow down until they'd reached the financial district, where witnesses and cameras made further attacks unlikely. She pulled into the underground garage of a building Lorenzo owned, the heavy security gate closing behind them like a steel curtain. Only then did she turn to assess the damage. Lorenzo was pressed against the door, his left hand clamped over his right shoulder, where blood seeped between his fingers. His face was pale but composed, though sweat beaded at his temples. "You're shot," Valentina said, already moving into the back seat, her hands gentle but efficient as she pulled his jacket aside. "Grazed," Lorenzo corrected, though the amount of blood suggested otherwise. "Feels like it caught the muscle." The driver was already on his phone, calling for their medical team, but Valentina wasn't waiting. She stripped off her own shirt, revealing a black sports bra and the extensive scarring across her ribs that told stories she'd never shared. She used the fabric as a compress, applying direct pressure to the wound. Lorenzo hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. His eyes were on her face, studying her with an intensity that had nothing to do with pain. "Where did you learn to drive like that?" he asked. His voice strained but curious. "Medellin," Valentina said simply, checking the wound's depth. The bullet had carved a furrow through the meat of his shoulder, but hadn't hit bone or major vessels. Painful, but survivable. "They taught us that cars were weapons before they taught us to shoot." "Remind me to give you a raise," Lorenzo said, then laughed, which made him wince. "Jesus, that hurts." "Don't talk," Valentina ordered, her fingers steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. "And don't you dare pass out on me." His hand came up, covering hers where it pressed against his shoulder, blood making their skin slick. "Wouldn't dream of it." The interrogation of the captured assassin from the convoy attack had yielded exactly one useful piece of information before he'd bitten down on the cyanide capsule embedded in his molar. A name. Konstantin Volkov. A fixer who operated in the shadows between legitimate business and the underworld, the kind of man who could arrange anything from forged passports to contract killings, provided the price was right. Valentina sat in Lorenzo's study, her laptop open, navigating through encrypted chat rooms and dark web forums that most people didn't know existed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years operating in digital shadows. Lorenzo stood behind her, his right arm in a sling, watching the screen over her shoulder. The proximity was distracting, his body heat radiating against her back, but she forced herself to focus. "There," she said, highlighting a thread. Volkov uses a courier service that operates out of the port district. They move packages for people who don't want questions asked. She pulled up shipping manifests, cross-referencing dates and container numbers. 3 days ago, someone paid for expedited transport to an abandoned shipyard on the east side. Former smuggling operation that got shut down 2 years ago. That's a lot of deduction from shipping records, Lorenzo observed. It's not just the records. Valentina switched windows, revealing surveillance footage she'd obtained through methods she didn't plan to explain. I reached out to an old contact, someone who owes me a favor. He's been watching Volkov's network since the attack. This morning, a woman matching Francesca's description was spotted entering the shipyard. She zoomed in on a grainy image, dark hair, similar build, moving with predatory grace. It's her. Lorenzo's good hand came down on the desk, his jaw tight. Then we move tonight. I'll have a tactical team assembled within the hour. No. Valentina closed the laptop, turning to face him. A tactical team means noise, witnesses, and time for her to slip away. This needs to be surgical. 2 people, in and out, before she knows we're there. 2 people, Lorenzo repeated, his eyes narrowing. You mean you? I mean us, Valentina corrected. I need someone watching my back, and your men don't know how Black Widows operate. They'll follow protocol, and protocol will get them killed. Lorenzo's expression darkened. I'm not letting you walk into a trap alone. You have a bullet wound that's 4 days old, Valentina pointed out, gesturing to his sling. You're a liability. The bullet grazed me, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. And I've fought with worse. You're not going without me, Valentina. That's not negotiable. They stared at each other. 2 immovable forces locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Valentina stood, closing the distance between them until they were inches apart. If you come, she said quietly, you follow my lead. No ego, no heroics, no making decisions based on emotion. Francesca got into your head once already. I need to know you can put a bullet in her if necessary. Lorenzo's hand came up, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. I stopped feeling anything for her the moment that dog started seizing. What I feel now is practical. She's a threat that needs to be eliminated, and I want to be there when it happens. Valentina searched his eyes for hesitation or doubt and found only cold certainty. She nodded once. We leave at midnight. The shipyard is industrial, lots of cover but also lots of exposure. We'll need suppressed weapons, night vision, and a clean exit strategy. Already thinking 3 moves ahead, Lorenzo said, something like admiration in his voice. My kind of woman. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to address. Valentina stepped back, breaking the moment. Get some rest, she said, and have your doctor clear you for the operation. I'm not dragging your unconscious body out of a firefight, Lorenzo caught her wrist as she turned to leave, pulling her back with enough force that she collided with his chest. His good arm wrapped around her waist, holding her against him, and for a moment they simply breathed the same air. "I know you're used to working alone," he said against her hair. "But you're not alone anymore. Get used to it." Valentina's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat through the fabric of his shirt. Steady, strong, alive, because she'd stopped a fork from rotating a plate. She thought about all the people she'd lost, all the connections she'd severed to stay invisible, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, she could risk being seen by this one man. "Midnight," she repeated, pulling away before she did something stupid like kiss him. "Don't be late." As she left the study, she could feel his eyes on her back, a weight that was becoming dangerously comfortable. She told herself it was just mission focus, just two people united against a common enemy. But the flutter in her chest suggested her body knew she was lying. The shipyard waited in the darkness, and with it, the woman who'd tried to destroy them both. Valentina checked her weapons one final time and tried not to think about how many ways the night could end in blood. The shipyard smelled of rust and brine, decades of salt air eating through metal skeletons that had once been cranes and cargo containers. Valentina moved through the darkness like a shadow, her suppressed Glock held in a two-handed grip, night vision goggles turning the world into shades of green. 20 feet behind her, Lorenzo matched her pace, his injured arm functional enough despite the sling he'd abandoned against doctor's orders. They'd entered through a gap in the perimeter fence, avoiding the main gate and the security camera that Valentina had spotted during her digital reconnaissance. The warehouse where Francesca had been sighted sat at the center of the yard, a 3-story structure with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. Valentina raised a fist, signaling a stop. Something felt wrong. The shipyard was too quiet, the kind of silence that came not from emptiness, but from predators holding their breath. She scanned the catwalks, the container stacks, the shadowed recesses between buildings. Nothing moved. No heat signatures, no ambient sound. That's when she knew. "It's a trap," she whispered into her comms, already moving backward toward Lorenzo. "We need to—" The first shot came from a shipping container to their left, the round sparking off the concrete 6 inches from Lorenzo's head. They dove for cover behind a rusted forklift as more gunfire erupted from elevated positions, at least 3 shooters, coordinated and disciplined. "Sniper positions," Lorenzo growled, his back pressed against the forklift. "They knew we were coming." Valentina's mind raced, calculating angles and odds. The shooters had them in a kill box, covering every approach to the exit they'd used. The warehouse behind them was probably full of additional hostiles. They were pinned, outgunned, and exactly where Francesca wanted them. "The crane," Valentina said suddenly, pointing to a collapsed gantry crane 30 yards to their right. Beneath it was a maintenance shed, and beyond that, stacks of industrial equipment covered by weathered tarps. "We need to reach that position." "That's 40 yards of open ground," Lorenzo pointed out, as another round sparked off their cover. "I know." Valentina pulled a flashbang from her tactical vest. "On my mark, you run. I'll suppress." She didn't wait for agreement. Pulling the pin, she hurled the flashbang toward the nearest sniper position and immediately opened fire, her suppressed weapon spitting rounds in controlled bursts. Lorenzo broke from cover, sprinting in a serpentine pattern as bullets chewed up the ground behind him. Valentina followed, emptying her magazine to keep the shooters' heads down. They slid behind the crane's fallen structure as rounds pinged off metal, both breathing hard. "Now what?" Lorenzo demanded, checking his own weapon. Valentina's eyes were already scanning their new position, cataloging resources. The maintenance shed's door hung open, revealing shelves of equipment, acetylene tanks, welding supplies, industrial chemicals in corroded containers. An idea formed, reckless and dangerous, but possibly their only chance. "Cover me," she said, darting into the shed. She worked fast, years of improvised weapons training guiding her hands. Acetylene tank. Check. Magnesium strips from a welding kit. Check. Fertilizer-based rust remover that was basically ammonium nitrate. Check. She grabbed duct tape and zip ties, assembling components with the practiced efficiency of a bomb maker. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway. "Valentina, what are you—" "Shaped charge," she said, not looking up. "Amateur hour version. But it'll work." She attached a simple radio trigger, scavenged from a broken walkie-talkie. "We're going to give them something bigger to worry about than us." She hefted the crude device, maybe 20 pounds of improvised explosive wrapped around the gas cylinder. "That container they're shooting from? If I can get this close enough, the overpressure will either kill them or convince them that staying in position is a bad idea." "That's insane," Lorenzo said. "You have a better idea?" Valentina checked the trigger's connection. "We can't shoot our way out, and we can't wait for reinforcements, so we change the game." Lorenzo studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Tell me what you need." "Distraction. Something that pulls their attention for 10 seconds. She pointed to a stack of paint cans. "Think you can make some noise?" Lorenzo's smile was wolfish. "I'm a mobster. Making noise is in the job description." 3 minutes later, a series of small explosions rippled through the yard as Lorenzo's improvised incendiaries ignited, sending columns of flame into the night sky. The sniper's attention shifted fractionally, and Valentina moved. She sprinted low and fast, the device clutched against her chest, closing the distance to the container. She placed it at the base, armed the trigger, and ran. The explosion, when it came, was beautiful and terrible. A flowering bloom of orange flame that lifted the 40-foot container 6 inches off the ground and sent shrapnel screaming through the air. The sniper fire stopped abruptly, replaced by screaming. Valentina and Lorenzo used the chaos to reach the perimeter fence. Climbing through twisted metal as secondary explosions cooked off ammunition inside the container. They didn't stop running until they'd reached their extraction vehicle 3 blocks away, both covered in soot and breathing hard. Lorenzo looked at her, his face smudged with ash, his eyes bright with adrenaline. "Remind me never to piss you off." Valentina allowed herself a small smile. Smart man. The trap at the shipyard had been designed to kill them, but it had also been a message. Francesca was escalating, getting desperate, which made her more dangerous. Valentina knew from experience that cornered predators were the deadliest kind. The real location came through an encrypted message 2 days later, sent from a burner phone to one of Lorenzo's secure lines. An address in the warehouse district, accompanied by a single sentence: "Come alone, or I start killing your men one by one." "She wants me," Lorenzo said, staring at the message on his phone screen. "She wants both of us," Valentina corrected. "This is personal now. She failed her mission, lost her cover, and nearly died in that explosion. Her reputation is destroyed. The only way she salvages anything is by finishing the job." They went together despite the warning, arriving at an abandoned textile factory as dawn broke over the city. The building was a corpse of brick and broken glass, 4 stories of industrial decay that had been slowly surrendering to gravity for the past decade. Francesca was waiting on the top floor, standing in the center of a space where massive looms had once clattered. Morning light streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating her like a spotlight on a stage. She'd abandoned her designer wardrobe for black tactical gear, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that revealed the predator she'd always been beneath the socialite's mask. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," Francesca said, her voice echoing in the empty space. She held no weapon Valentina could see, which made her more dangerous, not less. "Or that you'd bring an army. But no, just you two. How romantic." Lorenzo started forward, but Valentina caught his arm. She could read the setup, the clear circle of space around Francesca, the lack of cover, the sight lines from hidden positions. This was an arena, and Francesca wanted an audience. "How many shooters do you have positioned?" Valentina asked calmly. Francesca smiled. "None. This isn't an execution, Valentina. It's a reckoning. You and me, no weapons, no backup. When I kill you, I want Lorenzo to watch. I want him to see that the woman who saved his life was just another killer playing dress-up." "And if I win?" Valentina asked, already removing her weapon and setting it aside. "Then I suppose my employers will send someone else." Francesca shrugged. "But you won't win. I've seen your file, little cartel princess. You're good. But I've been doing this since before you learned to hold a knife. You're just a killer pretending to be a servant." Valentina stepped into the circle, rolling her shoulders to loosen them. She could feel Lorenzo's eyes on her back, his tension radiating across the distance between them. She thought about who she'd been, the weapon her father forged, the girl who'd learned to kill before she'd learned to love. She thought about who she'd tried to become, invisible, harmless, erased. And then she thought about who she was now, standing between a monster and the man she'd started to care for, despite every survival instinct screaming at her to run. "You're wrong," Valentina said quietly. "I was a killer pretending to be invisible. Now I serve justice." Francesca laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. "Justice? Is that what you tell yourself when—" Valentina moved. She closed the distance in 3 steps, her first strike a feint toward Francesca's center mass that drew the other woman's block high. Valentina pivoted, her elbow driving into Francesca's kidney with the full rotation of her hips behind it. Francesca grunted, spinning away, and they circled each other like wolves. "Fast," Francesca admitted, wiping blood from her lip. "But sloppy. Emotional." She attacked in a blur of movement, a combination of strikes that would have killed most opponents. But Valentina had been trained by men who believed hesitation was death, and she met violence with calculated brutality. She caught Francesca's kick, twisted, and used the momentum to throw the other woman into a support pillar. Francesca recovered instantly, launching herself forward with a flying knee that Valentina barely blocked. They grappled, 2 apex predators fighting for dominance in close quarters where technique mattered less than will. Francesca was strong, skilled, and utterly ruthless, but Valentina had something the Black Widow didn't. She had a reason to survive that went beyond completing a contract. Valentina broke the grapple with a headbutt that would have shattered a normal person's nose, then swept Francesca's legs. The Black Widow hit the concrete hard, and Valentina was on her instantly, knees pinning shoulders, hands closing around her throat. "You were sent to kill a man who didn't deserve it," Valentina said, her voice steady despite the blood running from her split lip. "You played with people's lives like they were toys. You murdered an innocent woman and wore her face." Francesca struggled, her face turning red, but Valentina's grip was iron. "I'm not pretending to be anything," Valentina continued. "I know exactly what I am. And right now, I'm the thing standing between you and him." She applied pressure until Francesca's eyes rolled back and her body went limp, unconscious, not dead, though the urge to finish it burned in Valentina's chest. She stood, breathing hard, and turned to Lorenzo. "Call your cleanup crew and find out who hired her. This doesn't end until we cut off the head." Lorenzo crossed the distance between them, his hands framing her face, checking her injuries with gentle fingers. "You could have killed her." "I know," Valentina said, "but I'm trying to be better than what I was." He kissed her then, fierce and claiming, tasting like blood and promises. When they broke apart, Francesca was being zip-tied by Lorenzo's men who'd been waiting outside. "Justice," Valentina had said. Maybe she could learn to believe it. The interrogation of Francesca took 72 hours and yielded the names of 3 rival families, 2 corrupt politicians, and 1 international crime syndicate that had pooled resources to eliminate Lorenzo Simon. Within a week, Lorenzo's retaliation was swift and absolute. The kind of message that echoed through the underworld like a gunshot in a cathedral. Cross him, and the consequences would be biblical. Valentina watched it unfold from the estate, coordinating intelligence and identifying targets with the cold efficiency of someone who understood that mercy in their world was just another word for weakness. But as Lorenzo's empire stabilized and the threat level decreased from critical to merely dangerous, she felt the familiar itch returning, the urge to disappear. She packed her bag on a Thursday morning while Lorenzo was in the city handling the legal aftermath, payoffs and paperwork that would ensure no investigations reached too close to the truth. She moved through the bedroom that had become hers, taking only what she'd brought, leaving behind the expensive clothes and the life she'd briefly imagined might be possible. Her hand was on the doorknob when Lorenzo's voice stopped her. "Going somewhere?" She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, still in his suit from the morning meetings, his expression unreadable. The sling was gone, his shoulder healed enough for full mobility, and he looked every inch the dangerous man who'd just dismantled a conspiracy through strategic violence and political maneuvering. "My debt is paid," Valentina said quietly. "You're safe now. The threat is neutralized. Our agreement was protection in exchange for service, and I've fulfilled my end." Lorenzo pushed off the doorframe, moving into the room with predatory grace. "Our agreement was that you work for me. I don't recall putting an expiration date on that contract." "Lorenzo, you're running again," he interrupted, closing the distance between them. "That's what you do when things get complicated, when people get too close. You disappear and convince yourself it's survival." Valentina's jaw tightened. "It is survival. People around me die, Lorenzo. Everyone I've ever cared about ends up dead or worse. I won't do that to you." "You already saved my life twice," Lorenzo countered. "You've bled for me, killed for me, stood between me and an assassin when you could have just walked away. So forgive me if I don't buy the martyr routine." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document, extending it toward her. "I had my lawyers draw this up. A new contract, if you will. Legal, binding, and significantly more comprehensive than our previous arrangement." Valentina took it, unfolding the pages with cautious fingers. Her eyes scanned the text, widening as she read. It wasn't an employment contract. It was a partnership agreement, full legal authority over half his legitimate businesses, her name on deeds and bank accounts, protections and provisions that went far beyond employee benefits. At the bottom, in a separate clause, were the words, "with option for permanent personal merger, pending mutual agreement." "Marriage," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're asking me to marry you with a legal document?" "I'm a pragmatist," Lorenzo said, something almost vulnerable flickering in his dark eyes. "And I know you well enough to understand that pretty words and romantic gestures would just make you bolt faster. So I'm offering you what I know you understand: power, protection, partnership, an equal stake in everything I've built." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You said you serve justice now. Serve it with me. Stop running from the life you deserve, because you're afraid of being happy." Valentina's hands trembled slightly, the document crinkling. "What if I'm not good at this? At being someone's partner, at staying in one place?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Lorenzo said simply. "That's what partners do." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the mob boss or the dangerous man, but someone who'd seen every dark corner of her soul and chosen to stand beside her anyway. Someone who offered her not redemption, but acceptance. "I'll need a lawyer to review this," she said. A small smile tugging at her lips. Lorenzo's answering grin was triumphant. "I'd expect nothing less." 2 weeks later, they sat at table 7 in Casa d'Oro. The restaurant had reopened with enhanced security, and a new manager, after Marcus had retired to Florida, with a generous severance package. Valentina wore a black dress that probably cost more than 3 months of her former waitress salary, her hair loose around her shoulders, a diamond on her left hand that caught the light from the Murano chandelier. Lorenzo raised his wine glass across the table. "To new beginnings." Valentina touched her glass to his, the crystal singing. Around them, the restaurant hummed with the conversations of people who didn't know that the elegant couple in the corner booth had recently dismantled an international assassination plot with bullets and improvised explosives. A young waitress approached nervously, clearly new, and stumbled over her introduction. Valentina caught her eye and smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "Take your time," Valentina said kindly. "We're not in a hurry." The girl relaxed visibly and took their order with growing confidence. After she left, Lorenzo reached across the table, lacing his fingers through Valentina's. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Being on this side of the table?" Valentina looked around the restaurant, at the life she'd fought to protect, and the future she'd stopped running from. She thought about the fork that had changed everything, the violence that had revealed her truth, and the man who'd offered her not escape, but home. "Like I finally stopped pretending," she said. Lorenzo lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, to the calluses that told stories of survival, and the ring that promised tomorrow. "Good," he said, "because I have plans for us, partner. And they're going to require both of our particular skill sets." Valentina's smile turned dangerous, the weapon and the woman finding perfect balance. "I'm listening." Outside Casa d'Oro, the city continued its endless dance of light and shadow. But inside, at table 7, 2 people who'd learned to survive alone discovered something infinitely more powerful. They'd learned to survive together.